So after reviewing Unicorn Wars, a lot of people were begging me to do this movie called Birdboy, which is a movie that the same director made, but it was before Unicorn Wars. And Birdboy is not a normal movie by any means. This movie is chock full of symbolism and really deep issues that plague all of us. There's so many ways you can look at this movie. You could look at it as an allegory for just growing up and children being thrust into adulthood. It could also be about nature versus nurture and how one can take control of their own destiny if they're willing to. It's also about family, tradition, religion, and how some of those things can become extremely toxic. It talks about drug abuse, deforestation, police brutality, survival, mental illness, jealousy, rage, and above all else, this movie is about finding hope in the most bleak situations, and also about how running away from your problems isn't always the answer. This movie was created by the same person that made Unicorn Wars, obviously, Alberto Vasquez, and it was distributed by G-Kids. Yes, I'm talking about another G-Kids movie because their catalog is amazing. And just like Unicorn Wars, it seems that Alberto loves to use cutesy little animal characters as the characters in the movie because he finds them universally relatable. Using these to portray such deep, powerful messages just shows the innocence we have in all of us and how that innocence can get corrupted like that. One heavy theme throughout this movie is survival because, you know, this is set in sort of a post-apocalyptic world and how survival can make us do crazy things. In a world without law or order, all you have is just yourself and maybe a few loved ones. And this movie really explores that concept. Now, before we get into this movie, I recently started to pick up art. And sure, it might be a little late, but I wanted to give it a try. Yeah, my art really isn't the best, but holy shit, I'm definitely having a lot of fun learning. And that's why I wanted to talk about today's sponsor, which happens to be Skillshare. Now, Skillshare, if you don't know, is the largest online learning community for creatives. It's an amazing place with a bunch of classes with a wide variety of different topics. It ranges from so many different things, like if you're like me, you want to learn how to do art, there are hundreds of different classes about art, and they're all incredible. That's also great for me on Skillshare because my main goal with drawing art is eventually I want to learn how to animate something, which they have an entire section about animation as well. But it could be anything: illustration, graphic design, photography, creative writing, music, production. Maybe you want to be an entrepreneur, or maybe you want to learn how to budget or learn how to be a little bit more productive. And if you're one of those extremely experienced people, there are classes for beginners, but there are also classes for professionals. So whatever skill level you are, there's always something for you on this site. Now, me personally, a class that I took that really helped me try to find some sort of daily thing to do with art. It was a class called Drawing Every Day by Samantha Baker. Because when you're starting out learning a new skill, especially like art, you're really overwhelmed. There's so many different things you could learn or should learn, and you don't really know which direction to go. So the first 1,000 people to click my link in the description get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Now, that's the first 1,000 people, so I would do it now. I highly recommend going to check out Skillshare. It's always great to learn a new skill in life, and it's never too late to do it. Doesn't matter what age you are or what you're planning on doing. If you're going to start, might as well start now. The movie really starts out with a bang. Seriously, there's a nuclear explosion. We see an industrial world run by factories, people working like slaves. It's kind of ironic how dystopian this world feels before the explosion, but an explosion turned the entire industrial island to ash, leaving little to nothing behind. And the rest of the movie follows a multitude of different characters and how they survive and deal with this new world. There isn't necessarily one main storyline. I guess you could say the Birdboy storyline is the main one, but there's so many different stories and they all take up a lot of time in the movie, and they're all interconnected by that way of survival. But before we explore these characters and their meanings, I just wanted to mention the art style, animation. I mean, like, it doesn't even need to be said. We've seen Unicorn Wars. I'm just a sucker for art styles and animations, especially 2D animations, where you can see the lines. You can see that everything was drawn by hand. You can tell the colors in the sky are watercolors. You can see the outlines of the characters move. Everything flows and it just feels good. And just like Unicorn Wars, whereas this animation is beautiful, it also is extremely grotesque at times. I mean, when you're in a post-apocalyptic world living in the aftermath of a nuclear fallout, you'd probably be expecting a decent amount of viscera. This is definitely one of those movies that you're gonna have to watch a multitude of times to truly grasp what everything means. because there's so many different things going on at once. But let's start with the first pair of characters that we meet. They're not really a big part of this movie, but I did want to mention them. I honestly don't even think they have a name in this movie, so we'll just call them Rat Daddy and Rat Baby. We see them scrounging the area for scraps of copper. The boy's father mentions that copper is blood, copper is life. And what I can gather from watching this movie is copper is just the form of currency now, because obviously money doesn't really exist anymore. But they end up trading copper for food, shelter, and other things like that. And throughout the movie, we get little small scenes of them scrounging around for scraps, trying to make enough to just survive that day. The harsh reality of survival. And things get really interesting with these two characters in the end of the movie, which is why I wanted to mention them. They meet another father-son, and they're basically identical. They end up getting in a fight over their territory and copper, and this part is definitely sad and honestly brutal. Both of the fathers start attacking each other, and these kids are witnessing their dads fighting, and they don't really know what to do except follow their dad, because that's what they've been doing in this world, is just following their dad. So they both look at each other fearing what to do, and then they eventually start attacking each other because they're just following what their parent is doing. The light-colored rat killed the other father, and the dark-colored rat killed the other kid. So the father lost a son, and the son lost a father. And the scene is just so depressing, but also just shows how brutal the world of survival is. Because as the father walks away after killing that man and seeing that his son is dead, the kid ends up just following the dad because he doesn't know what else to do. He doesn't have anyone. And the dad reluctantly lets him follow, even though that same kid just killed his son. Because this kid was absolutely terrified. He didn't actually want to kill that other kid. He was just doing what his dad did. It really shows that sad nature of these children. They're just doing what their parents do regardless of the terrible nature of it, because, you know, they're scared in a world of pure survival. So they're just going to follow what they do. Their story is definitely one of the more darker and fucked up ones in this movie, because they really aren't on screen long. They're just on screen for what, roughly 5 to 10 minutes. And yeah, sure, this is a post-apocalyptic world, but this is how some people live. They just live to survive. All right, let's move on to the main cast of the movie. We have Dinki, and she is probably one of the most relatable characters in the movie. She lives with her family in a small house, and we see her butting heads with her father, or her stepfather, I should say. And as you can see, her father does not look like everyone else. He really just looks like a human wearing a mouse costume, which didn't really make sense to me at first, but the more you really look at the context clues, it makes so much more sense. And also, if you watched the short of this movie before watching this movie, it would make a little bit more sense as well. But if you pay attention, you'll notice that they have a family portrait, and the man that is her father is not the man that's there. Her father passed away in the explosion, and this man ended up becoming her stepfather. And to explain the whole him wearing a costume of a mouse, it's just implying that he is trying to play the role of her father. He's trying to replace her father, when in fact he is definitely not her father. I love how they made the character look like this. It's such a good way to show someone who's become your step parent. It may try to fill that role of a father, but to some people that just won't work. It'll never happen, especially in a situation like this. And another thing that this family portrays is religion, and how a religious family tends to act. Because a lot of religious families tend to focus on their image rather than caring about their family. To explain this a little bit more, Dinki's mother seems to always nod and agree with her stepfather, even when the stepfather is kind of stepping over the line and being a little bit too much. She just kind of blindly agrees. And the reason she does that is fear of the family falling apart, fear of not having a perfect family. And that's another thing. She probably remarried really quickly in fear of not having a perfect family. And I'm not going to say this is just religious families, but religious families tend to focus on this more. They have that fear of divorce, that fear of not having the perfect 2 parents, 2 children, religious family. We could even tell in her mother's face that she realizes how this makes Dinki feel, but again, she's just more concerned with keeping the family together and portraying that perfect family to everyone, even though it's extremely toxic and makes Dinki extremely unhappy. And also, they portray religious fear-mongering so brilliantly too. Again, I just want to mention, I'm not trying to bash every religious person ever here. I'm just trying to bash the toxic religious people. Her mother mother holds a baby Jesus and tells her that the baby is crying because of her actions. And when she squeezes that baby Jesus, it literally starts crying blood. And this shows that constant guilt tripping that a lot of families do to their children. The guilt trips and the fear mongering. There's just so many families out there that put God and religion above their children, above happiness, above everything, and it ends up just making a terrible situation. And I'm sure there's plenty of black sheeps out there that would relate to this situation. And what makes matters worse in this situation, and something else very, very relatable, is her brother, who is a dog who can't talk, which we'll get to later. But her brother is deemed the perfect child. He does everything right. He doesn't make mistakes. His parents love him wholeheartedly. And all of these things combined, Dinki is driven to do rebellious things like drugs, sex, and eventually trying to run away with some other characters. She hates the life she's living in and wants to run away, so she meets up with Sandra and Zorrito and plan to escape from the island. Next, let's talk about the other two characters in our trio of characters trying to leave. Sandra is definitely one of the most interesting characters because you don't get much of a backstory for her. You don't understand much of why she is how she is. Because throughout the movie, she has voices in her head telling her to do terrible things, literally telling her to kill people at times. I feel like this represents mental illness. More specifically, you could say schizophrenia. I feel like this could kind of umbrella over other things as well. But throughout the movie, there are moments where these little creatures come out, start whispering in her ear, telling her to push someone over a cliff or let someone drown. And throughout the movie, she consistently pushes these voices back and keeps them at bay. And I like how she never gives in to these voices, because I feel like he's trying to show how people live with these types of mental illnesses. Because there are people in the world who have these voices come into their head and say these awful things, but they live with it every day. It's just something they deal with constantly, and no one can really see it. No one can tell what's going on except them. That's kind of my take on Sandra. Leave in the comments below if you have a different theory about her, because again, she's definitely someone who doesn't have much information about her. And last in the trio, we have Zorrito. He is probably the only character in this film who doesn't really have any glaring issues and is very, very kind. And I feel like that itself is the issue, is that kindness can be a detriment. From what I could gather, I believe him to be that personification of selflessness and kindness, and how too much selflessness is honestly bad. I guess another way to word this is just naive kindness. He represents those people who are constantly stepped on, walked over, belittled, treated terribly. The people who are too kind to retaliate and always end up needing someone by their side to help them. A lot of people would consider him to be weak or whatever, but throughout the movie, that person who ends up being by his side is Sandra. And there is even a point in the movie where Sandra's voices are telling her to kill Zorrito. He's a weak waste of time, you know, he's holding you back type shit. But he is probably the only character in the entire movie that shows any sense of selflessness whatsoever. He cares for everyone, regardless of who they are. And again, that works to his detriment. That is how he gets in bad situations. He trusts people too easily. He gives in too easily. I'm not sure if Alberto was just trying to convey that too much kindness can just make you an easy target, or potentially make you dependent on other people too much, or could also be viewed as how the world treats kindness. I guess it's really how you want to view this, but in my eyes, I feel like that's really what he was going for, is especially in this world of survival, kindness will only get you so far. Those three characters throughout the movie end up trying to steal money and then finding a way to get off the island. But there's actually more characters that have different stories, like Zacharia, which he's not a part of the group at all, but he is also planning an escape from this island. His story is very tragic because it has to do with drug addiction. Throughout the movie, you see him trying to save up money in order to make enough to get off the island. And in order to make that money, he ended up becoming a drug dealer. And one of his customers happens to be Birdboy, which we're going to be getting to later. Once he comes home, you start to realize how awful this situation is, because he's not only saving money for himself, but he's also saving money for his drug-addicted mother, who seems to be in sort of a catatonic state. But she seems to speak through this spider. This spider is very aggressive. very awful and abusive to Zacharia, yelling at him to give her the drugs. And when he gives her the drugs, the spider becomes enormous and abuses Zacharia even more and treats him terribly. Now, at first, I was a little bit confused about the whole spider catatonic state mommy situation. But once you think about it, this is obviously just an allegory for drug addiction, because in real life, this is how it feels when you are feeding your parents' addiction. It feels like your real mother, the one who raised you, the one who treated you kindly, the one who loves you, is basically in a coma, almost dead. That person before the drugs kind of just doesn't exist anymore. And all that's left is this terrible, evil spider that emotionally and even sometimes physically abuses Zacharia. And this angry beast just lives off the drug. But it does have kind of a happy ending. Zacharia ends up killing the spider, which is the equivalency of kind of just saying, he's not going to give his mom drugs anymore. He will not feed into that drug addiction anymore. And in the end, you even see his mom smile at him, because his mom, the mother before drugs, is proud of him for actually standing up for himself and cutting out the drugs from her life. Alberto does such a good job at displaying these issues in such a unique way. And I want to talk about one more character, or I should say characters, before we focus on Birdboy. Now, I know it's kind of strange how inanimate objects in this movie have sentience, but boy, is it brilliant how it's set up. So like I said before about the brother of Dinki, there could be multiple reasons why he's the way he is. Because Dinki's brother, he's a dog, and every single person in this movie is an animal, and everyone can talk, but Dinki can't. And he is honestly treated like a dog, like a pet, by his parents throughout the movie. Now, me personally, this could be two things. The first reason, this could just represent some sort of mental disorder, whether that be like nonverbal autistic or something even more severe, because he is the only animal in this movie who struggles to speak. There's even a point in time where he almost says a word, and he tries to say a word and it's almost there, but not fully. But this also could be why he is the favorite, because he needs the most attention because of his issue. Now, another way to look at this is he could purely just be the family pet, the one who sucks up to his parents, does anything and everything that his parents ask of him. He listens to them and obeys blindly, whereas Dinki does not, which is why he is the favorite. And he kind of prides himself on being the parents' pet and being better than Dinki. But I feel like the mental disorder route could be a little bit more realistic as what happens with the alarm clock. The alarm clock is Dinki's alarm clock. Yeah. And every morning she wakes up and ends up knocking it down and breaking it. Her father or stepfather ends up fixing the alarm clock, and this time he actually ends up giving it legs in order for it to go out and find himself. And this is where this character truly shines, because you find out why Alberto chose a sentient clock. This character represents existentialism and the fear of wasting time and just dying in general. Because what better way is there to display that fear of losing time than a clock? But whenever this clock starts walking around, every time the clock moves, he starts panicking and screaming that another hour has passed. That means we're one step closer to death. You can't get time back. He continually exclaims that whenever the clock on his chest moves, that you'll just never get this time back. We need to hurry. And this part is just pretty depressing. The brother of Dinki ends up attempting to murder the alarm clock. This kind of confused me at first, because all this alarm clock wants to do is just, be happy. Like whenever her brother came up, that's all the clock was exclaiming, is how happy he is that his brother is here. Now me personally, I believe he kind of did this out of jealousy, right? Because he's been with his family this whole time, and he's not been able to speak once. And now all of a sudden this alarm clock is just walking around and talking just fine. And also his parents are treating him kindly. So I feel like out of rage and jealousy, he ends up throwing him into the water and then watching him drown. Yeah, pretty dark. And last but definitely not least, we have Birdboy, who's probably one of the most complex out of all of these. It's really hard to call Birdboy a character. He's more of a personification of nature itself. And I feel like that really rings true, because at the beginning of the movie, this line hit hard, honestly. The rat boy was asking his dad if Birdboy was still alive, and his dad says no. And then he says, not everything with a body is alive. Because Birdboy is suffering from the loss of his father, and his father is literally the only family he had. And the problem is, his father didn't die in this explosion that killed so many different people. He actually died by getting shot out of the sky by a police officer under the suspicion of selling drugs. Now, obviously, this is a big allegory for racial profiling, as throughout the movie, this officer is training a new recruit and constantly telling him how dangerous Birdboy and just birds in general are. There's even a point in the movie where he shoots an innocent bird mom out of a tree while all of her children just watch in horror. And then he just sits there pompous and proud of himself that he just murdered an innocent mom. And the thing that's very interesting about the officer and his recruit is how this racism is taught and learned. But whenever you see him shoot down Birdboy's father, you could see the officer recoil and kind of regret his decision for a second. And it was instantly replaced with duty and pride. It just pushed down all of that question of things, you know? And that was the moment where he convinced himself that what he did was right, even though he knew deep down it was wrong. And I love that because throughout the movie, the same thing is happening with the recruit. He's constantly being fed these lies that Birdboy and just birds in general are these awful beings. And not only that, but the recruit is showing off how cool he looks with a gun and a uniform in front of his friends, trying to show how cool he is. And I feel like this is kind of showing that a lot of people get into the Force because of that power dynamic. Because, but let's be real, that is very true. Some people go into police work and other jobs like that in order to just have a power dynamic over people. Like the captain's past is kind of being shown through the recruit because the captain is just passing down everything that was taught to him. Birds are bad, and being an officer, you're above other people. I feel like this is really just Alberto showing that the problem isn't necessarily the people, but it's the system. Is that new people coming in are being convinced of these bad things. And then the cycle keeps going and going. But anyway, back to Birdboy. His father was actually transferring seeds that has the power to save the forest. There's these golden seeds that we see every once in a while throughout the movie, and these things can just create life out of the ground. And that's what Birdboy's father was doing. You could even see him in the sky looking down at all the trees being cut down, and a tear falls from his eye. And right at that very moment, he gets shot through the head. And all that's left is Birdboy. And Birdboy cannot live life normally. He is constantly on the run from these officers. Birdboy ends up using these drugs, these happy pills, in order to push down all of these inner demons. And the inner demon is actually personified in this movie. This is actually one reason why he left Dinki behind, because he was afraid for her. Him and Dinki were actually in a relationship, but over time he decided to run away because, you know, it just wasn't safe. The first time he actually runs into the officers in this movie, he gets shot in the arm, but he was able to survive by heading to a beautiful area full of green and life. And the reason I mention green is because something interesting about this area, about this great tree, is this is the only section in the movie that has the color green in it. Everywhere else, there's no green. And we can see that this is a sanctuary of nature and life itself. He's taking care of all of these different birds. And whenever Birdboy is injured and he falls into the water, all of these little firefly looking things come down and heal him. And we'll find out later that these little fireflies are just souls. But this is why I feel like Birdboy is the personification of nature. He's almost like the leader of the forest. He's the one going out attempting to save the forest. We even see that Birdboy takes care of this very old bird, and this bird actually thanks Birdboy one last time for taking care of them as she passes on and her soul joins the others. So let's talk about his inner demon real quick. Throughout the movie, Birdboy does everything he can to suppress this demon. He mainly uses drugs to try to quell it. But towards the end of the movie, Dinki finds herself in a bad situation. Dinki and the group of 3 kids trying to escape the island. As they were trying to escape, they ended up finding themselves trapped by a community of savages and even cannibals. These are kind of what's left of the survivors of the explosion. They end up telling them that they're going to kill them and torture them slowly. Birdboy was told of this by another bird, and that was the catalyst that truly pushes him over the edge and allows that demon to take control. So what is this demon inside Birdboy exactly? I was kind of confused about it, but after thinking about it a bit, I feel like it's a demon of vengeance, of nature's vengeance. Birdboy being nature itself in this movie, nature has been treated harshly throughout. And this is nature, the demon, kind of fighting back. Because this demon has been growing in Birdboy over time, and he's been doing everything he can to keep it from killing anyone, from destroying anything. And it was finally released in a fury of vengeance that killed everyone at the camp and savagely, brutally murdering all of them in order to save Dinki. So yeah, happy ending, right? Birdboy saved Dinki and her friends. They get on the little ducky boat and they sail out to the sea to escape the island. Birdboy ends up using the lighthouse in order to help them navigate the rough waters. And then boom, Birdboy was shot directly through the heart by none other than, you guessed it, the recruit. The one throughout the movie who has been taught to hate birds, who has been taught to shoot birds on sight, and just like his captain before him, he had that face of regret. He had that face of confusion and questions. So in the end, yeah, Birdboy does die, and all three kids never make it off the island. So I guess the question is, was any of this worth anything? This whole movie was their journey to escape, but they never did. So what was this all for? But I feel like the end is a lot more than meets the eye. The soul of Birdboy and the others find Dinki to show her the great tree. And that's where the movie ends. I feel like this ending is saying running away from your issues isn't always the answer to your problem. Running away from this island because it's dying maybe isn't the best thing to do. There are ways to fix this island, and Dinki was exposed to that one thing that has the power to fix this island. And it really is up to her and her friends to make this change. This movie is such a well put together work of so many different stories that have so many different issues that so many people deal with. You really need to look close at everything or you might miss something, which I just want to mention, I might have missed something. I don't know. It really covers so many different hard to cover topics in such a good, almost light way where it's very digestible. If you've never seen this movie, I highly recommend it because it really is something special. I honestly like this movie a lot better than Unicorn Wars, don't get me wrong. Unicorn Wars is good. I feel like this movie just did it better. So thank you everyone for watching this video. If you like this video, please make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on your dang notifications. Turn it on. Okay, I don't care. If you don't want to, turn on your notifications now. Do it. I'll wait. No, go. Come on. Don't fucking give me that look. Fucking do it. You did it? Okay. We're good. Right? Okay. Bye.